The battlefield still smoldered, an endless graveyard of twisted metal, broken banners, and ash that fell like black snow, and in the silence that followed, the once mighty warlord lay shattered among the wreckage of her fallen empire. Her armor, once polished obsidian, was cracked through with glowing fissures, her crimson cape torn, and her body, this body that had crushed legions, toppled cities, and made entire worlds whisper her name in terror, was nothing but a cage of pain, bleeding and broken on the scorched ground. Yet still she breathed. Still her golden eyes burned with the stubborn fire of a creature that had never bowed, never yielded, never begged. And now, to her disgust, it was not one of her elite healers, not one of her soldiers, not even a fellow alien of her own kind that stood over her, but a human, a fragile medic in torn white fatigues, his hands trembling not from fear but from urgency, his voice low and steady as though the chaos of war had not touched him, as though saving lives, any lives, was all that mattered. "Hold still," he said, kneeling beside her, his kit opening with the soft snap of buckles, his fingers already stained red as he reached for her wounds, and her lips curled into a snarl, the words hissing past her teeth. "Don't you dare touch me, worm! I would rather bleed into the dirt than feel your hands upon me." Yet even as she spat venom, her vision blurred. Her strength faltered, and she hated herself for the shiver of weakness that betrayed her, for the way her body betrayed her pride. But the human didn't flinch, didn't back away, didn't even look offended, only looked at her the way one might look at a dying animal that still had its fangs, dangerous but pitiful, and he said quietly, "You can hate me later. Right now, I'm the only thing between you and death." And something in his tone was so maddeningly calm, so unbearably steady, that for a heartbeat she almost forgot who she was, forgot she was the scourge of 100 worlds, the blade of her people, the terror of humanity itself, and she almost heard only the man, not the species, not the enemy, only the man with warm eyes and stubborn hands who pressed gauze to her side as though she wasn't poison, wasn't ruin, wasn't his captor's nightmare, but something worth saving. And she thought, with a bitterness like acid, that this was worse than dying, to be seen as fragile by the very creature she had called weak. And still, though her pride screamed, her body stayed still beneath his touch, the warmth of his hands foreign against her cold skin, the hiss of torn metal around them echoing like ghosts, and her thoughts drifted unbidden to the beginning, to fire and conquest, to the day she had first enslaved humans, laughing at their frailty, never imagining one would kneel over her with the audacity to mend what was broken. And as the medic worked, his voice breaking the silence now and then, "Stay awake. Breathe steady. Good. That's good." She felt something she had not known in centuries of war, something disorienting and alien in its own right. Safety not from power, not from dominance, but from gentleness, and she loathed it, loathed him, loathed herself for clinging to it. But still, when her body shook with pain and her eyelids fluttered, she found herself listening to his words like they were anchors in the storm, each syllable dragging her back from the abyss. And for the first time in her long, bloody reign, she realized that perhaps the universe's cruelest punishment was not defeat, not injury, not humiliation, but mercy offered by the one she had scorned, mercy she could not refuse without embracing death. And so the feared warlord, once a titan of flame and iron, lay silent while the human she had called weak dared to save her life beneath the falling ash of her own empire. But survival is never so simple, never so merciful. For even as the medic bound her wounds with strips of fabric and patched ruptured veins with trembling steadiness, the warlord's ears caught the distant clang of boots, the guttural alien tongue of her enemies approaching through the smoke, and her bloodied lips twisted into something halfway between a curse and a laugh, for she had not fallen to the might of humanity, not in glorious battle as she had always envisioned, but to the knives of traitors within her own ranks, her generals, who had waited like vultures until the moment her campaign faltered, then struck her with precision and betrayal sharper than any blade. And she could see their shadows now cutting through the fog, hunting not for her survival, but for the confirmation of her death, for the sight of her corpse to parade before the masses, to claim the throne she had carved out of blood. Yet the human did not cower when she hissed the warning, did not abandon her as any sensible creature might. He only muttered beneath his breath, "Of course it couldn't just be simple." And then, with a gentleness that contradicted the urgency, he lifted her, her massive frame awkward in his arms, his body straining but unyielding, and he staggered toward the shattered ruins of a downed carrier, each step a defiance against reason, each heartbeat a drum that declared he would not let her be taken. And she stared at him with venom in her gaze, furious that this fragile thing carried her like some sacred relic, furious that her life was bound to his. Yet beneath the fury was something colder, something unspoken. The dawning realization that he was not afraid of her, not truly, and that frightened her more than any weapon. They hid in the carcass of the ship, the air thick with smoke and ozone, the ground vibrating with the march of soldiers who called for her death. And in that dark hollow, the medic laid her down and whispered, "Stay quiet, stay with me," as though she were some wounded comrade instead of the galaxy's executioner. And when she opened her mouth to spit another insult, to remind him of the world she had burned, no sound came, for the pain was too great, and all she could do was watch as he prepared an injection, his brows furrowed, his lips pressed tight, hands steady despite the tremor in the world outside. And she thought, for the first time, how strange it was that his species had survived her campaigns at all, not because they were strong, but because they were something worse, unbreakable in spirit, relentless in compassion, defiant even in the face of gods. The night stretched on, filled with the voices of soldiers combing the wreckage, but they did not find her, and as exhaustion pulled her down, she heard the medic humming softly, an old human tune, low and broken, and against her will, against the centuries of hatred forged into her bones, she let that sound carry her into uneasy dreams. When dawn came, filtered through smoke-stained skies, the medic woke her with a gentle shake, whispering that they had to move, that the traitors had not given up their hunt. And though she wanted to snarl, to demand her throne back, her body betrayed her once more, too broken to walk, and so again he bore her weight, not as a master carrying treasure, but as a man carrying a burden he refused to put down. And step by step they crossed the wasteland of war, past the corpses of her soldiers and the shattered husks of machines that once roared her name into the heavens, and each mile tore at her pride, each heartbeat etched the truth deeper into her soul, that her survival now rested on the back of the very species she had enslaved. And yet the human never gloated, never mocked, never so much as hinted at triumph, only pressed forward with stubborn grit, pausing now and then to check her wounds, offering her water. She spat on at first, then drank when thirst crushed defiance. Days blurred into one another, filled with hiding, with whispered instructions, with her hatred curdling into something stranger, something heavier, for she began to notice things she had once dismissed. The way he spoke to her as though she were more than a weapon, the way he laughed softly at his own failures when he stumbled, the way he stared at the stars as though they were old friends instead of distant enemies. She hated those things, because they reminded her of what she had buried long ago, that beneath armor and conquest, there had once been a creature in her too, who looked at the stars and wondered, who believed in something gentler than fear. And so the feared warlord, the scourge of worlds, found herself asking, late one night as the fire crackled between them, why? The word ragged and broken in her throat, why save me? And the medic looked at her, tired but steady, and said simply, because no one deserves to die alone, not even you. And that answer struck her harder than any blade, harder than betrayal, for it stripped away the mask she had worn for centuries and left only a silence she could not fill. Their journey became legend in whispers, though neither of them knew it then, for word spread that the warlord lived, that she walked with a human at her side, and her enemies grew restless, fearful, for even broken. Her name was Fire, and the idea of her rising again was terror enough to fracture alliances. Yet within her, something else fractured too. The certainty that she was untouchable, that strength was everything, for the medic proved her wrong with every step, with every refusal to abandon her, with every smile that carved through the ash of her world. And when at last they reached the hidden valley where remnants of her loyal guard still waited, blades sharp and eyes full of vengeance, She should have cast the human aside, should have taken her throne back in fire and blood. Yet when one of her captains sneered and moved to slit the medic's throat for daring to touch their queen, she raised a trembling hand and whispered, "No." The word foreign, heavy, but final, and the silence that followed was heavier than thunder, for in that moment, in that one word, the warlord chose not just survival, but something greater. She chose humanity, not as a weakness, but as a weapon no empire could crush. And so she lived, healed not only by the medic's hands but by his defiance, his refusal to see her as a monster. And though the galaxy would forever remember her as the warlord who burned worlds, she knew in the secret places of her heart that she would also be remembered as the woman who was saved by the human she had called weak. And in that contradiction, in that impossible truth, she found something stronger than fear, stronger than conquest, stronger than the blade of war itself.